Hey everyone, I'm Aarti. I'm one of the founders for Pacific Northwest Product Group. Continuing on our podcast series, which I hope you all are enjoying and watching. Continuing on that series with local leaders in Pacific Northwest region, I'm very excited to have Graham Sheldon join us, uh, who needs not much introduction, but just a quick overview. Graham has spent over 2 decades at Microsoft in a variety of different roles, and currently a chief product officer at UiPath. Graham, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit more?
I'd be happy to. And thanks for having me, Aarti. Um, yeah, so in my current role, I'm the Chief Product Officer for UiPath. So I own the vision, the strategy, and the roadmap for what we're doing around AI and automation at UiPath. And in my purview, I have the core product management. I also have design, technical alliances, and pricing, packaging, and licensing sort of in my purview. Um, and you mentioned I was at Microsoft for quite some time, indeed. I joined UiPath about a year and a half ago. But before then, I was the CVP of product for Microsoft Teams, basically from its inception. And before that, spent a long time in Bing and Dynamics, and got some really interesting experiences there that I'm happy to share with you.
Awesome. Thank you, Graham. So with that, let's jump into our first question. So I think I would love to know your how did the journey look like in product management as you worked in different orgs, different products in different roles? How does that path to executive look like?
Yeah, so I've always been in the product discipline, but I've meandered around to sort of what I like to say, I get a really good breadth and depth of experience. So I think great product people, especially executives, have a good team. So they have a nice broad foundation upon which to build, and a breadth of experiences in different disciplines and different industries, in different business models. But they also are able to go very deep and use their depth of experience in certain areas to meet new challenges and to be credible and ground what they're doing in real stories that they can draw upon. So in my past, I started out in product in Dynamics, and I got to go very deep in our first SaaS product around Dynamics CRM, and owned a lot of the features there as sort of an ICPM. And then I was given one of the sort of key moments in my career. I was given the chance to work with Satya Nadella, who at that time was the CVP of the Dynamics team. And I got to spend 4 years with him, sort of getting a very broad view of what it meant for him to be an executive over a large variety of different products, and also during his transition into the Bing MSN and ads world. And so, that time was pretty special because it gave me a very broad strategic lens over how the business operated, how Satya operated, to build
Awesome.
culture. And that was really a very helpful thing that helped, I think, in some ways accelerate my career at Microsoft, and gave me some of those opportunities to go into to Bing, and then ultimately into Microsoft Teams.
So what was your role in Bing at that time when you were working with Satya?
So I was Satya's TA for 4 years, 2 in Bing and 2 in Dynamics. But then once I was in Bing, I got a chance to go deep again. So, I got to go very deep into algorithms design, into research, into the live labs at the time. I also owned some of the, both front end and back end infrastructure for the core search functionality. Everything from ranking and pricing and marketplace design to spelling and alterations and indexing and content. So I got to go sort of much deeper into and build up my practical education in AI, which became one of the things that I really enjoyed most and made a career out of.
That's awesome. Yeah, we often think about what kind of stepping stones sometimes do you need to. It sounded like that worked as a stepping stone for you into the executive side of the world and gave you a peek into that. Awesome. Great. Thank you. So just fast forward today. So what kind of things are you focused on today? I mean, we all know about UiPath, but I would love to hear more about what kind of areas specifically you are focused on and what kind of industry trends do you see?
Yeah, Aarti, one of the things that I'm focused on many different sort of industry interesting trends there. The convergence in the automation space with AI is one of the most interesting. So what we're seeing, what UiPath is known for is RPA. And that's fundamentally changed over the last 5 years to include adjacent markets like process mining and task mining, like the iPaaS market and integration services, as well as things like document understanding and and NLP. And the convergence of those markets with things like low code and traditional RPA UI automation has been really interesting. And so now where AI and the automation is going is sort of seeing the best of both worlds. I like to sort of think about the AI stuff that's going on today. It's really interesting to see people
Yeah.
who start with an AI only focus, they miss out on some critical things to make them successful. And I think about it sort of like AI is this great brain, but you kind of need a body. You can't do much with just a brain. You need
Mhm.
to have the appropriate context to bring in, and you also need to be able to take action and put humans in the loop in certain cases so that you can trust the decisions that are being made are checked in the right ways. And so
Absolutely.
that combination of AI and automation is one where it's like peanut butter and jelly coming together. And that's been a really interesting thing to watch in the marketplace.
That's great. Are there any specific applications that you expect will emerge more out of this?
Yeah, I mean, the marketplace right now is very much focused on sort of the natural language and digital assistant kind of experiences, which I think is very natural. But it's kind of it's interesting. It's everything looks like a nail when you have a hammer. ChatGPT and the chat experiences are just one way to expose the power of what generative AI is capable of doing. And I think that much like, the advent of the mouse or even, conversational AI when the Echo came out in Amazon, it's very good at certain things, but you still have a keyboard for a reason because it's the most efficient way to do a lot of things. And I'm not using my Echo today to do much more than, set timers and turning the lights on and playing music. So there's a time and a place for everything. And I think the natural evolution of these sort of more natural experiences is very cool to see. And it goes well beyond what people are doing with just chat-based experiences.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. No, I know AI is in top of mind for probably a lot of product managers these days. So I'm sure this is something it will continue to be top of mind and will continue to be one of the very desired careers, I would say. Great. I would love to hear, was there any particular defining moment in your career or any specific decisions you made for your growth? And would love to hear what kind of learnings or takeaways you had from there.
Well, certainly saying yes to Satya for that TA role was certainly one of the defining ones. But there's a couple others. Um, I think people often make the mistake that their career is going to be a stepwise progression from one job to the next. And, if they see, a refocusing or pivoting to a marketing role or to a data science role or to even a sales role is some step backwards. Or the other thing I tend to hear about is saying like, oh, I have 10 people and I only want to take a role where I'm going to have more than 10 people. And the increases in scope of responsibility need to be somewhat like monotonically increasing. And I think some of the things that I've learned is that your career is not a straight path from, product person to lead to GPM to director to executive. And it's really useful sometimes to zigzag a little bit to get a little exposure to something that perhaps is outside of your bailiwick. And so one of the things that I had done, I was, GPM for the MSN Apex and what became Bing News at the time,
Mhm.
was a step backwards where I took a bet to go run an incubation effort for AI
Got it.
in Dynamics. And that was it was an unexpected move, I think, in some ways. People are like, well, you're giving up this big team and this big charter and all of this budget and interesting things like that. Well, what are you doing? It went back to like a one pizza team where there was a lot more risk. But at the time, I saw sort of at that time, this was 10 or so years ago, convolutional neural nets were a big new thing, and perception in the areas of recognizing objects and images was coming to bear. It was an interesting time, I thought, with an inflection point to apply some of those in this case back in the dynamics and business applications world. And it gave me a chance to sort of go back to my roots and doing some data analysis. And I was actually a data science manager. That was sort of my role at that time. And that moment gave me a chance to learn again, to get exposed to a different area of the business. And from that, I was able to come back into a different role. I came back into teams afterwards, and it was a great way to sort of, again, ground myself in the practice of building great product and doing research at the same time.
Interesting. So basically, if I'm getting you right, so it looks like your philosophy has been to be curiously experimenting with new technologies, potential areas, and not necessarily building kind of large organizations, which you think might naturally follow.
Yeah, actually, if I put a finer point on it, it's more that I get uncomfortable when I feel like I'm not learning enough. And if things get too easy or too commonplace, if I don't have new challenges, and I feel like I'm kind of plateauing. And so it's kind of time to go and re-examine what it is that I want to go throw myself into. And I think those are pivotal moments for a lot of people. Is you don't want to become complacent in your
Hmm.
career. You always need to keep pushing.
So did you consciously, just to follow up on this one, did you consciously think about what to optimize for at each kind of phase in your career? Sometimes people want to optimize for growth, sometimes for learning new areas or running large organizations. Did you ever like consciously think about it? I'm just curious, what's your philosophy around that?
It's always been a conscious choice. I mean, there are certain constraints, certain things that need to be true. You need to like your manager. You need to agree, be passionate about the space. You need to either feel like um, you have the support of the company, and that your family and some of the key things you don't have to compromise on, right? But assuming that you have a good manager, that you're passionate about the space, and that you have it works for your life, then I've always optimized for sort of learning and new challenges. So taking on the data science role I mentioned to you was a big bet. Coming
Awesome.
back into Teams and starting up a new incubation to compete with Slack, that was a big bet. It wasn't clear at that time that Teams was going to be the natural successor in Microsoft. There were 5 other teams that thought they were competing with Slack at the time that I took that role with Brian McDonald, and it succeeded. And jumping into UiPath was a way for me to jump back into AI in a way that got me exposed at a C-level to a lot more things. So I've always optimized for learning, assuming that those other things are true.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. I think my last question to you, what advice would you have for this product community in Seattle? We have a ton of talent here. So any words of advice from you? What would you
And
like to see more maybe from them?
I think, as you were describing to me before we got onto this call, is very true. Is like there's a lot to be learned from each other. Especially, we have enormous amount of talent in this group, and it's not just the folks who are down in San Francisco or in Boston or in other places around the world. Like this community needs to get together to share a little more openly with one another about the stories, their concerns, and those things to learn from each other. So I'd say, the only piece of advice I would give is be humble, be vulnerable, know, and ask good questions, because it's all about learning.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ram. I really appreciate your time and thank you for sharing your experiences and advice with this diverse product community here.
My pleasure, Aarti. Thank you for the great questions.